All right, we're back. And how did the exercise of chunking go? Did you go out there and chunk people up? And did you go out there and chunk people down? And did you go out there and chunk people laterally? Or were you able to practice with somebody? Obviously, you can just see the applicability of all these strategies just as we're going through them. So let's keep moving forward and say, okay, well, how does this relate to stories? Well, stories are just a lateral thought. And I'll give you a couple examples here to start out, but really you get a presenting objection from somebody. And what you're going to do then is you're going to take them over the critical faculty barrier to the objection solution. So whenever somebody gives you an objection, it's really their critical faculty barrier that's saying yes or no. It's really saying no. It's saying false. It's saying I don't believe you. So you have to bypass that critical faculty barrier to get to the objection solution. So a guy comes in my office. I do a ton of seminars a year. A guy comes in my office and he says, Matt, I don't want to use you. I already have an advisor, but I want your free stuff. Naturally, I was so inclined. I said, okay, great. Here's your free stuff. Thank you for coming in. Gave him a pat on the back and gave him a hug. Obviously, that didn't go that way. But instead of getting pissed off at the guy and saying, well, wait a minute, that's not how it works, I took a step back and said, okay, how do I get him over his presenting objection? How do I get him over his critical faculty barrier? And so essentially what he said to me was, Matt, I already have an advisor. I don't need your stuff. I'm happy where I'm at. So here he was a copier salesman. So he sold copiers into offices for 20 or 30 years. Here he was going to retire. And so here's the story and metaphor I used him. I said, you're a copier salesman. Have you ever went out to sell a copier to somebody who said, hey, I don't need what you have. Old Bessie in the corner is the best copier in the world. I've had him for 30 years. I don't need a copier. But you knew that they were wasting time, they were wasting money, and they just weren't having the efficiency that they need out of that current printer, if you will. And he said, yeah. I said, and what did you do? You were very persistent. You sold them the copier, and then you came back probably a few weeks later just to check in on the guy or the lady. And when you went in there, they said, hey, that's the best decision I've ever made. I can't believe how much time I was wasting. I can't believe how much money that was wasting me. I'm so happy you gave me this product. Has that ever happened to you? And the guy said yes. I said, well, that's exactly what we're doing here. So you can see how just using a story, using a metaphor, can bypass somebody's critical faculty barrier. And so really, you have to really think about people on the left-hand side there have current beliefs and current problems. So even if they don't have an objection, you're walking in and they have a frame, and their frame is their beliefs. And you have a frame, which are your beliefs. And those things are going to collide if they're not on the same page. So how do you get them on your page? Is in the client's mind, you have to ask, what is this an example of? You have to provide a link by bypassing that critical faculty barrier to install a new belief or solution. So again, just like we said, this is how when we learn something new, you're taking something unfamiliar and matching it with something familiar to give them a new belief, to give them a new learning, to give them a new idea. And you can see that I did that exactly with the gentleman in the copier salesman, if you will. So everything you do, and when you think about it, and this is the idea that I was talking about collapsing somebody's frame. Somebody is coming in with a frame, and what is that frame? And it's their current beliefs, their current position in life. So no matter what you have, no matter what your product is, you have to understand their frame, and their frame is their current beliefs, and you have to get them over to your frame. So your story. Here's the structure of your story. You need a setup, you need conflict, you need resolution. So the setup. Remember the copier salesman. So you sell copiers. You've went into somebody before and they said, we don't need a copier. Old Bestie in the corner is awesome. There's the conflict. What's the resolution? You sold it to them. You came back a few weeks later and they said, wow, that's the best decision I made. I can't believe how much time and money I was wasting. So you can see the setup, the conflict, and the resolution. You can see there's an attraction. You bring somebody into the story. You have the tension. And then the satisfaction. So each story has to be kind of a ramp up to a tension, a conflict, and then down to the resolution and the satisfaction. There are a couple different ways to tell stories, and I don't believe this is actually in the book. The editor chopped this off, and so it just never got in. But I think it's so important, and it will be in the next version of this, and in my presentation book coming up that revolves around my 6-box matrix for presenting, because this is so important. I use all these strategies and I use them all the time in all my presentations. So here's number one, the hero's journey. So what is the hero's journey? A hero's journey is one of kind of rags to riches, if you will. So I tell the story all the time when I'm speaking, especially in small businesses and small business expos, as I talk about my trials and tribulations. I bring them back to when I was 12 and we had no hot water. And I start and I walk them through going to college and struggling in high school and college, and then coming out of college, and then boom, ramping up and having money, and then kind of crashing it back down, and then ramping them back up again. And I kind of pace and lead them all the way through kind of my journey. The hero's journey obviously starts out low, has struggles, and ends at a high. You have nested loops. And so really what nested loops are open loops. So you just kind of have a bunch of stories that, so one strategy is you tell 4 stories in the beginning of a stand-up presentation, if you will, all right? And then at the end, you close out those 4 stories. So you can tell 4 stories and leave them open-ended as an open loop, if you will. An open loop is telling a story and leaving it at the cliffhanger, if you will, and then kind of picking it up later in your presentation. And what it does, and why you need nested loops and how it works, is that if you tell some stories and leave them open-ended and then kind of pick up the story later in your communication, in your presentation, and then maybe you pick up another story, you start a story and then pick it up later, is that you keep what's called open loops. And when you have all these nested loops and these open stories kind of converging in on one, what will ultimately happen is that you keep the listener's minds open. See, too often we shut down our mind because we think we know something. So if your learning is prematurely complete, you stifle your learning. And so if you can keep an open loop and an open mind, you kind of keep them open to learn and want more. Now, this is not done consciously, but at an unconscious level, if you have a story and you leave it at a cliffhanger, you kind of think in the back of your mind, or you're looking for the answer, you're looking for the resolution of the story in the back of your mind. An example of this is maybe at home, your significant other has said, hey, I got to tell you what happened today. And then all of a sudden, something distracts them, they go off onto their own, and you're like, hey, wait a minute, come back and tell me that story. That's how a nested loop would work, and you could have multiple nested loops within a presentation, kind of a cliffhanger, so they're waiting for the answer. One is a petal structure. So a petal structure is, if you think of a flower, in the middle you have a central concept. In the middle, I call that concept a 7-factor phrase. It could be a 3-factor phrase. It could be a 5-factor phrase. Just for ease of purposes, I call it a 7-factor phrase. So what you do is create 7 different stories around that methodology. So for instance, I was helping a sales manager, a national sales manager, put together a presentation for his national sales meeting. And one of the things we came up is that your energy flows where your focus goes, or where your focus goes, your energy flows, right? And so what he was doing then is every time he told a story about something he wanted them to do, I want you to focus in on calling on your top 20% of your clients. And he says, when you focus on your top 20% of your clients, then where your focus goes, your energy flows, right? And so he kept then he would say, what I want you to do is focus in on proper call rotations. When you have proper call rotations, you're going to maximize your effect, maximize your touches to your clients. And when you can focus there, I know your energy is going to go there and we're going to have success, right? So he kept kind of wrapping stories around a central concept. Converging ideas. Converging ideas could be, you could tell a story about how Steve Jobs and Wozniak came together, and you could tell Jobs' story and Wozniak's story, and how these ideas converged to blow up into one of the greatest technological companies of our day. Stories help you start with why. They hit that emotion. They say, why should I listen? Why is it important to me? What is your passion? See, your story is your why, and your story should be filled with your passion. People are going to buy your passion. They're going to buy why you do what you do, and stories are going to help you do that. Stories help you pace and lead your audience. I think we've already kind of talked about that a little bit, but you're going to pace your lead and your audience through your experience, or through what you want them to be open to. When you pace and lead your audience, you could see you start out with the conflict. You start out with bringing them into the story. You rise the story up to a conflict and bring it down to a resolution. So you're going to pace and lead your audience through your stories. You have closed and open loops. A closed loop is telling a story, closing the story, going on to another concept or idea. What you want to do is make sure the loop is open. When you have an open loop, you're bypassing that critical faculty barrier. Their unconscious mind's open. So if you can leave an open loop, you could fill their unconscious mind with your data, with your ideas, with your product. So you can tell stories with volition to open loops, fill their unconscious mind with the data, and then close the loop when you're done, filling them with your ideas and persuading your clients. So let's look at the construction of a metaphor. You want to change a client's personal reference to a character in the story. So let's go back to my Jack Nicklaus story. Change a client's personal reference to a character in the story. One reason I tell the Jack Nicklaus story is, I try, and this is all plausible, this isn't necessarily logical, but I change my audience's reference to Jack Nicklaus. I paste the client's situation by linking behaviors and events. The king wanted him to come there. I didn't, Jack was like, I don't know. So no matter what I'm having people do, even if that, as you're watching this, you're like, you know what, I could be brushing my teeth, I could be working out, I could be eating, I could be playing with my kids, I could be doing something. So when I start out with that, I start just really linking your behavior to Jack. And then I find resources for the client. Jack went and did it. He found out, hey, wow, this is the greatest week of my life. I'll play golf on the greatest golf courses in the world. And then make sure the story features events where the characters resolve the conflict and achieve the desired outcome. So Jack had a great time. He came home and he had a great benefit because, he got a golf club, got a 500-acre golf club. So he got to think bigger. There was a reward at the end of the story. And so basically your precepts are identifying the behavior and events, determine the strategy in question, pinpoint the desired outcomes, and then your mapping strategies, you've got to displace the referential characters, establish characters, and preserve the relationships, my audience and Jack Nicklaus. Establish connection between the client's current situation or behavior and the character situation behaviors. Jack didn't really want to go. Establish resources of the characters and an event. Again, Jack went. Jack enjoyed himself, and the resolution was he had a great week, was on a private jet, and he got a 500-acre golf club. So, recipe for a solid metaphor. When you're going to go tell a metaphor in business or use one in your personal life, use one in business, use one in one of your sales, is you want to find a story, namely a piece from your past that had an impact on you. You read it over or go over it once mentally. You let it cook in your mind overnight. When you let things cook in your mind overnight, your unconscious mind goes to work for you in connecting the dots. You read it over and go over it again mentally the next day. You let it cook overnight again in your mind and you deliver the story. I recommend you have 2 nights where you let the story cook in your mind. In essence, what I really want you to do is read the story before you go to bed. Read the story when you wake up in the morning. Read the story when you go to bed. Read the story when you wake up in the morning. Go deliver the story. By doing so, you're going to help make some mental connections and bring the plausibility of the story home to your audience and really make it applicable. So that's the recipe for a solid metaphor. Stories are going to make your presentations more impactful. They're going to make you more dynamic, and they're going to make you a better communicator.